Good afternoon. My name is Randa Watts, and I am the Clean Water Organizer for Prairie Rivers Network, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar titled Community Resilience, Integrating Health, Education, and Economy in Outdoor Recreation. Illinois' natural landscapes are an economic engine driving public health and high-impact youth development. This webinar will explore how investing in our outdoor recreation creates a strategic win-win-win for regional resilience, vitality, and prosperity. Experts Dr. Brooke Jacobs, Dr. Katie Dudley, and Dr. Evan Colson will connect the dots among wellness, workforce, and economic resilience, reframing outdoor recreation as essential infrastructure rather than a discretionary amenity. This presentation will position public lands as integrated systems that drive public health, workforce development, and economic resilience. As always, this webinar series is hosted by the University of Illinois Extension, and I'd like to thank Linda Durhack and Mike Delaney for all of their support. First, I'll go over some general guidelines, I'll introduce our guests for today, and then hand the screen over to our panel. As always, this webinar is being recorded, and you will get a link to the recording, contact information, and resources after the webinar in the next few days. If you have any questions along the way, please feel free to put them in the Q&A, and we will have time to walk through those at the end. And if you enjoy today's webinar, you can always find local government education webinars on our YouTube channel, which you can find in the chat. With that, I'll go ahead and introduce our speakers for today. Dr. Dudley's expertise lies at the intersection of local community engagement, economic development, and responsible tourism systems. She holds a PhD in Parks, Recreation, and Tourism Management at Clemson University and has over a decade of combined hands-on and academic expertise in sustainable tourism, planning, and development. Dr. Jacobs holds a Doctorate of Psychology from Western Kentucky University and is the founder of Delve Health Consulting. Dr. Jacobs' passion lies in consulting psychology, helping people, teams, and organizations create environments that both support wellness and effectiveness. And Dr. Colson holds a PhD in agricultural sciences with a focus on forest recreation, a master's of education in outdoor recreation resource administration. His professional service activities include work with Wilderness Education Association, the Association for Experiential Education, and as the Wisconsin State Advocate for the Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics. And with that, I will hand the screen over to you. Let me stop sharing here.
All right. Okay, so thank you, Randa, and everyone for having us today. And thank you to Prairie Rivers Network and the Resilient Community Series for creating space for this conversation. We're really grateful to be here because this topic really sits right at the intersection of a lot of issues that rural communities are already navigating every day. And one of the things that we noticed both in our work and in our own communities is that we tend to approach these challenges in isolation. So we talk about physical health over here, mental health over there, access to care in another place, youth out migration over there, economic opportunity and workforce development somewhere else. And then outdoor recreation or natural resources often get placed in a separate category altogether. So there's something nice to have, something tied to tourism or quality of life, but not always something that we think of as central to how communities actually function and thrive. So the more that the three of us actually started talking, the more that we realized that our work was overlapping all the time. So Brooke was looking at health, trauma, and mental wellness and the role outdoor access plays in healing and regulation. Evan was working in youth development, outdoor learning, and workforce pathways, thinking about how young people build confidence, skills, and connection through real experiences in real places. And then, of course, I've been focused on community and economic development, looking at tourism and outdoor recreation economies and how rural communities can build from the assets that they already have. But what we kept coming back to is that a lot of the challenges rural communities are facing are connected. And here's the interesting part, a lot of the solutions are too. So especially when we start talking about something, when we're talking specifically about rural places, we're talking about something that rural places already have in abundance, and that is land, water, forest, rivers, trails, working land, and the lived knowledge of people who know those places deeply. So that realization is really how this thought community of the three of us got started. So it came from recognizing that we were each working on different pieces of the same larger question. And that is, what if outdoor recreation and natural resources aren't just amenities, but part of the infrastructure rural communities need for health, economic opportunity, youth development, and long-term resilience? That's the frame that we want to offer today, not because outdoor recreation solves everything, it doesn't, but because it gives us a practical way to connect systems that are too often kept separate. And for us, we had, very professional sounding bios up at the top that Randa did. But it's not just professional, it's personal for us. All three of us have some version of the same story. And that's probably very similar to many of your stories too. We grew up in rural Illinois. We left to find education, work, and opportunity. And then we made a deliberate choice to come back or to stay connected because we were determined to build a life here. So before we get into in the framework, we want to start with the personal side because it's really our stories are a major part of why we care so much about this work. So first off, I'm going to toss it to my colleague, Dr. Brooke Jacobs, to share a little bit about her story and how she came into this work.
Thank you, Katie, and thanks for having us. And excited to see everybody this afternoon. So like Katie mentioned, I am from very rural southern, extreme southern Illinois, as we call it, from a town of 250 people, born and raised there. And I have always been proud of being on the river where I grew up, farm community, youngest of five kids. And I remember as I got older and older and started exploring outward, thinking, this is where I want to stay. This is where I want to live. This is where I want to raise my grandkids. I had the stories of my grandparents raising their kids on our family farm, and I said, this is it. This is home. I want to go explore, and but I'm coming back here. And so then as I went through high school and I went through college and I started exploring what I wanted to do, clinical psychology was that path for me. And I knew that to do the work in my community that I wanted to do, that meant getting a doctorate, and it meant coming back and finding work here. And I was sadly met over and over and over again with, you're probably going to have to choose. You shall either be a Grand Chanian your whole life and live here and find something else to do, which is teach or do something farming, something like that here, or you can go and be this psychologist elsewhere. Um, and I remember people saying, encouraging me to go and do the latter, go be the psychologist, go hit it big, go and come back and visit your parents. And I'm proud to say that I didn't take that that answer. And I said I'm going to find a way to come back and serve my community. There was no clinical psychologist serving in my area at that time, and so I went to college and got my bachelor's degree. And then after I came back, I commuted to get my master's degree and my doctorate degree from Grand Chain. Drove sometimes 2.5 hours one way to get to class because of my passion for my community. And so my ultimate goal is that no people in my community or similar communities will ever be met with that dichotomy of pursuing passion or pursuing a passion for the place where you live and your community. And so now coming alongside my colleagues here and finding that same passion, it's been really exciting to find that and develop that even further. So I'll pass it on to Evan to share his story and connection to our region.
Thanks, Brooke. And if you don't mind, advance the slide for me. Hi, everyone. My name is Evan, and I'm very excited to be presenting here with my two colleagues. And Brooke, can I go to the next slide, please? So, like my colleagues, I am someone who had the privilege of growing up in southernmost Illinois. And I've only recently returned home the last couple of years after about 2 decades working away. And as I started reflecting on that journey, I realized that I had a pretty interesting launch into that. And I feel like it might resonate with some folks here. But I went to a very small rural high school in southernmost Illinois with fantastic teachers, incredible mentors that plucked a country kid and said, listen, you might not believe in yourself yet, but we do. And if you work hard, if you put in the effort, you get good grades, you can go to college. And if you go to college, you can do anything you want. And so I believed them. I worked hard, I studied, I got the good grades. And I remember high school graduation, looking my mentors in the eyes as they were celebrating the mechanisms taking me to college, great GPA, scholarships to regional schools. And I felt like, wow, I did it. I'm ready for the next chapter. I got to go to school in Southern Illinois where the promises kept coming. They said, if you work hard and if you start to expand your awareness, you're going to be able to find your passion. You're also going to be able to match that passion with skills, and then you're going to invest that into a fulfilling lifelong career. And so my 4 years of undergraduate at Southern Illinois University, I did just that. I found natural resources. I found therapeutic recreation. I had classes that took me deep into the heart of the Shawnee National Forest, where I developed the deepest and richest sense of place one could imagine. And as I started to develop those skills and fall deeper in love with the place, I imagined how I was going to spend the rest of my career caring for this region. And I arrived at that stage ready to graduate. And it reminded me of a story my dad once told me about watching the Alton Bridge get built across the Mississippi. He said, did you know that one crew starts on one side of the river and they build out across the Mississippi, but on the other side, another crew starts building and they have to meet in the middle and connect. I feel like I got to that middle point on my bridge, ready to unleash my passion and skills on my home community, only to find that the other side hadn't started building the same bridge to me. And when I crossed that graduation stage, I didn't see the opportunities for employment. The infrastructure that got me to graduation didn't match the infrastructure here at home that allowed me to find meaningful employment in my field to contribute. And so I had to turn around, go back to the bank of the river and travel elsewhere. That led me to Cincinnati, Ohio, where I got to work in the Emerald Necklace, the parks around the city. I then moved to Deep East Texas, where I worked with young people, helping them fall in love with the landscape around them. And then people serve their community through service learning and sense of place. And it was only when my parents were old and needed caring for that I got to come home and find a way to start contributing and realize I wanted to be a part of building that infrastructure that allowed people to fall in love with place and to be able to serve and give back to that place. So thank you. I'm going to toss it back to my colleague, Katie.
All right. Yeah. So thanks, Evan and Brooke. So my story, we're going to start to sound like a broken record here among the three of us. So I actually grew up in Carrollton, Illinois. That's in Greene County, where my grandpa, my great grandpa ran the grain elevator there, which really just means that by the time I woke up for school on Monday morning, my dad already knew exactly what I had done all weekend. If you know, you know. But like a lot of rural kids and what we've already talked about, by the time I graduated, the message that I heard from my teachers and parents alike were pretty direct. If you want opportunity, you have to leave, and you have to leave and don't come back. And at 18, honestly, that sounded fine with me. I was ready to go. I wanted to live in a place where not everyone knew who I was and my whole family history by the color of my hair. But what I didn't realize at the time was how much that message stuck with me. So over the next 10, 15, 20 years, I moved through 13 different states trying to find the place, the job, or the life that finally felt like it fit. And somewhere along the way, that idea that I wasn't supposed to come back became internalized. It wasn't until I was living in Long Beach, California, paying way too much in rent, surrounded by too much concrete and way too many people, when somebody asked, well, if you could go anywhere, if you could move anywhere, where would you want to go? And it honestly surprised me that it just kind of came out. And I said, I want to go home. And I knew that going home wasn't going to mean stepping into some clear, already built pathway. It meant figuring out how to create one. But by then, I had collected enough skills and experience and relationships to at least begin trying. And then, through what honestly felt like a chance meeting with Brooke and Evan, this larger conversation started to take shape. Because what we're really trying to do here is ask, what would it look like if people didn't have to leave for 20 or 25 years before they could see a future in a place that they call home? What would it look like if young people could feel connected, needed, and capable of helping lead the future of their own communities now, not someday, not after they've left and come back, but while they're still here? So that's really the heart of this work for us. It's about health, it's about economic opportunity, and it's about youth development. But underneath all of that, it's about whether people feel like they have agency in the places they come from. So if that is kind of the grounding of our whole webinar today, I'm going to send it back to Brooke, who's going to help us start with the health and wellness piece and why outdoor access isn't just a quality of life amenity, but part of the infrastructure that rural communities need.
Thank you. Yes, so a lot of my work shifted from direct client service to working in systems work. So I now kind of am a systems psychologist, and my whole job is working with high regulatory, high stress industries, municipalities, trying to find solutions for these things and trying to talk about mental health in a different way. And again, using people who are in different currently silos to help you find the language to use has been a game changer for me. So part of what I love about today is that we're going to help give you guys some of that language and reframe the language. So before we talk and dive into economics and workforce, I want to ground us in something super simple. Mental wellness and outdoor recreation isn't just a lifestyle benefit. The research is clear that it's a preventative healthcare infrastructure. The reason that matters is it's no longer just correlation. It's showing measurable change in mental health when we look at outdoor recreation. It changes mental health outcomes, physical health outcomes, and even outcomes for long-term diseases. So reframing in that access with to outdoor recreation lowers stress and anxiety and depression. It improves our physical health and our longevity. And culturally and societally, it reduces our healthcare burden. So changing our language around, like, wouldn't it be great if we were all well and had access to this, to no, let's invest in preventative healthcare infrastructure. And so that starts to get the needle moving in a different way. So we're going to look at this from individual level impacts and then from community level impacts. So when we look at individuals, access to nature really impacts us in three specific evidence-based ways. It regulates stress physiology. So time in nature has been shown to lower cortisol, reduce blood pressure, and activate that parasympathetic nervous system, which is what puts our brakes on. And how many of us have conversations now of, I just need a break? If I could just check out and go for a vacation for a little while, if I could just X, Y, and Z, if I could just shut things off for a little bit, then I'd be fine. Our system and our culture of convenience world has told us that we should always be taking advantage of that convenience and we should keep moving. And then we feel guilt if we don't. And that down spirals into mentally unwell feelings. And so what can happen when we have time in nature? it immediately can put our brakes on a parasympathetic nervous system. How many times have you been driving down the road and something pops into your head that says, roll the windows down? It's nice, right? And you roll the windows down and your whole mood changes. It's not just happenstance. That is nature doing its job and doing its work. It's meant to ground us in that. And so when we have access to that, and that's all we're asking for, it seems like a no-brainer. All I'm asking for is this break. And here we have it, right? It restores cognitive functioning. This is where it gets really interesting. It doesn't just calm us down, it actually restores attention. So, one thing that we do a lot of times to calm down and take our break is we pick up these guys, our cell phones, and we sit and we scroll and we look at a screen and we check out, we dissociate. And we get the immediate feeling of calming down because we're not in our brain thinking about our to-do list. We're scrolling, we're deep diving into people's Facebook histories and doing whatever. We're looking at short-term videos giving us the next hit, and we have mirror neurons in our brain that make us feel what the other person is doing. So when we watch workout videos, they make us feel that same way. When we watch cleaning videos, they make us feel that same way of our house is clean. When we watch funny video, all of those things, they make us feel that. And as soon as that goes away and we look up to our not so tidy, pristine house, and our diet and exercise that are not where we want them to be, that immediately goes away, and it's doubled down with guilt and it's doubled down with shame. And so it's again this downward spiral. What happens when we actually engage with nature is not just checking out to only be met by doomsday of what we think our life is when we put the phone down. Attention restoration theory says that natural environments actually help replenish our ability to focus, make decisions, and regulate behavior. So not only does our time engaged in nature actually calm us down and put the brakes on, but when we go back to real life, when we go back to the job task, when we go back to the demands, we are actually have our whole brain on more than we did before we went into nature and engaged in that. So we're regulating more. So when we talk about burnout, this isn't just about relaxation, it's about cognitive recovery. That's why sometimes when you just check out, it doesn't work when you come back to it if nothing has truly changed. It reduces the risk for mental health disorders is that third way. Large-scale population studies are clear that when access is given to green space, it significantly lowers the rate of depression, anxiety, and some psychiatric disorders. And most people assume it's because of those first two prongs, right? It's putting our brakes on and it's restoring our cognitive functioning. So, one of the biggest reframes, again, language that I like to use is, oh, it's not just calming and like beach picturesque, relaxing. It's cognitively restorative. It directly impacts your workforce performance, your decision making, and your burnout prevention. So then when we start to zoom out to the community level, communities with greater access to parks, green space, and nature in general show lower rates of this chronic illnesses and reduce overall health care burden. Again, if the individuals in those communities are engaging with that and reaping the individual burden or benefits of that, not burden, individual benefits of that, they can then start to touch others' lives. It's not just the individual, it's then exponential, right? A healthy individual makes an impact on another individual. It's not just there. So that's the sum is greater than the parts piece. Social connection and safety improves with green spaces, social cohesion, people interact and they come together and they build relationships in green spaces. Have you ever been the person like at a park enjoying the beauty around you or the nature around you and see somebody with their nose in their phone and you get on your high horse and start judging them? Like, how could they be looking at We all have those moments, and we've all been that person. But it's those social connections in those moments when you make eye contact with that person and pull them into it and engage them. Research shows that safety improves and crime actually reduces in those areas with maintained green space. And so this is a rural advantage that we have, where we are uniquely positioned. We have forest and trails and water systems, and many urban areas are trying to recreate what we have artificially. They spend millions of dollars trying to put green spaces on top of skyscrapers and engage with it, and we have that here. So it's not necessarily what are we lacking. We have that viewpoint so much of, gosh, the barriers of living in a rural community. What are we lacking? How can we start to do this? I challenge people to say, how do we better leverage what we already have as a health intervention? It's already there as a health intervention. So what does this look like today? How do we start doing things differently? For businesses, it looks like looking at green spaces in your workforce. Do you have outdoor meeting spaces? Do you have break spaces that are outdoor for youth? Experiential learning in outdoor spaces, right? Nature and natural consequences are some of the best teachers sometimes, and they can pull you out of different perspectives so quickly. And we're not using those as much as we could. So thinking through that outdoor access is one of the most scalable, most cost-effective, most low barrier mental health and physical health interventions available. There's no referral, there's no wait list, and there's no stigma to engaging with it. And that is what I see constantly. When I talk to municipalities and providers, they say, we have all of these barriers to getting access to care. And so when we start to reframe, not just because we want to, but based on the science, based on the evidence, we start to see trails as health systems, right? Nature-based wellness as an access to wellness in general. So when we start to improve mental health and physical health at scale through outdoor access, we're not just looking at the individual well-being, then we're starting to influence workforce capacity, economic stability, and long-term community resilience. And those are the buzzwords in all of these meetings that we have all sat around the table at. So this is where we go directly to economic development. And I'm going to hand it off to my friend Katie to pick us up from there.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Brooke. That's exactly the lane that I'm going to stay in, the money. And I do actually mean that, because we all know that if we can't make this make economic sense, it doesn't scale. So the good news is that it does. The challenge is we've been measuring it wrong or questionably, and in many cases, we've been building it wrong. So for a long time, I just wanted to make sure we had the right slide up. Yeah. For a long time, outdoor recreation was treated like a bonus, something nice to have, something to market after the real work was done. But the data increasingly shows that outdoor recreation and natural resources are not just sitting off to the side of community development, they're infrastructure. At the national level, outdoor recreation is just under $7 billion sector, and that's about 2.4% of the US GDP. In Illinois, a state that I don't know how many people would call it an outdoor recreation mecca, those people who don't live here anyway, it contributes more than $26 billion already in economic value and supports around 180,000 jobs. That's not a niche industry, that's economic infrastructure. And infrastructure matters because it shapes whether, and we all know this, I'm probably speaking to the choir here, but it shapes whether communities can retain people, attract investment, support small business growth, and remain resilient over time. And for many Illinois communities, though, especially rural communities, these natural assets may already be among the most underutilized economic assets that they possess. So if you're trying to think about workforce retention, youth retention, entrepreneurship, community wellness, or long-term resilience, this isn't separate from those conversations. It belongs directly inside them. But here's where things start to get a little complicated, and I'm going to have you move me forward one, Brooke. Because even with all of this evidence, a lot of communities still struggle to turn outdoor assets into long-term community benefit. And part of that is because how we've been taught to think about tourism and visitor economies in the first place. When communities start talking about outdoor recreation or tourism, the conversation often immediately becomes, how do we get more people to come here? How do we increase visitation? How do we fill hotels? How do we drive spending? And those things matter. But if that becomes the only lens, communities can end up building systems that prioritize visitors over residents. And over time, communities begin experiencing tourism as something happening to them rather than with them. And we've all seen versions of this. Communities overbuild, natural resources get strained, traffic increases, and residents just stop using the spaces themselves. And eventually, something subtle but very important starts happening. And that is that the connection between people and place weakens. And even if you are having visitors come in after that's happening, they're not necessarily connecting. We're not necessarily utilizing that visitor economy as the front door to potential residents, right? The experience becomes transactional. So people show up, they consume the place, and then they leave. And the long-term community benefit never fully materializes. And that's not just a tourism problem, that's a systems problem. So this is where regenerative or resident-first approaches become important. At its core, it's a very simple idea. Instead of building places primarily for visitors, we build places that work well for the people who already live there, and we let visitation follow, not the other way around. Because when residents actually use and value the spaces themselves, visitors can feel that. They don't feel like they're consuming a product when they show up to your town. They feel like they're stepping into a real place with a real identity. So the question shifts from how do we attract more people to how do we strengthen the place itself? Because if an investment improves quality of life for residents, supports local businesses, strengthens stewardship, and creates healthier communities, it remains valuable whether visitation rises or falls. And that's not just a philosophy, it's actually a more stable and a resilient development strategy. So Brooke, I'm going to have you go forward one. So then the question comes, these are all great ideas, Katie, but what does this look like in practice? So what this looks like is building systems and not projects. So we stop thinking in projects because projects can succeed and still fail a community. Systems are what actually sustain it. And they build multiple smaller pathways that reinforce each other over time. So I brought in two examples to show you, and I specifically chose outside of Illinois so that I'm not choosing favorites or anything, but they're very similar landscapes to a lot of communities throughout Illinois. And the first one is the Bailey's Trail System in Southeast Ohio. So what's important about the Bailey's system is that it was designed as a tourism attraction first. It was designed as a regional development strategy. So it's an 88-mile trail system built on former mine land in Appalachian, Ohio. So right away, you're seeing environmental restoration and economic development happening together. But beyond the trail itself, what makes this work is the system around it. So there's a shared governance model, local ownership, and a nonprofit managing it as a social enterprise. So not just a one-time investment. And when you look at the outcomes, they're also not limited to just tourism. So they're expecting about $40 million in projected regional spending, job creation and retention, new tax revenue, but also improved physical and mental health outcomes for the residents there and connection among the region. The trails can serve as a way to connect different areas throughout the region. There's also direct investment in land restoration. And so overall, what it's doing here is not trying to kind of fit a square peg into a round hole. It's reorganizing how value flows through the region. And that's the difference between a project and a system. And I'll go one more example here just for good measure. You see a similar systems approach, but in a very different form with Farms Work Wonders in West Virginia. So this got started in a town of about 250 people. And instead of building one major attraction, again, they've built a portfolio of interconnected enterprises. So you have a working farm, a market and bakery, you have hospitality, workforce programming for young people. And all of those pieces work together to reinforce each other. So in last year, I mean, they've been at this for a while now, but last year they generated about $1 million in revenue. And importantly, that revenue then is reinvested back into youth programming and community development. So again, instead of asking, how do we attract visitors, they've built a system where young people gain skills, income, and a deeper connection with the land around them. Food is produced and sold locally. Visitors engage in something real, and value stays circulating within the community. And that's what resilience looks like, not one single pipeline, but many. So whether it's trails in Ohio or a farm in West Virginia, the underlying model is the same. You build a portfolio, not a single attraction. In Illinois communities, that can look like trails, river access, youth conservation crews, food systems, small businesses, local events, environmental stewardships, all reinforcing each other. So instead of just kind of tackling each one of these things on their own and hoping that they find a way, it's in the development process that we're making sure that they reinforce each other. Now you don't just have tourism activity, you have a system that keeps value local, creates opportunities for residents, supports quality of life, and most important, helps communities absorb change over time. So for my section, I'll leave you with this. I don't think Illinois has a natural resource problem. I don't think many people in this room do, but I think in many places we have a framing problem. If it's not directly related to traditional agriculture, we've often treated outdoor recreation and natural resources as amenities when they actually may be some of our most important forms of infrastructure. Infrastructure that supports health, workforce development, entrepreneurship, community identity, and economic resilience all at the same time. And when we start seeing it that way, the question then shifts. It's no longer how do we get more people to come here? It's how do we build communities people want to be a part of? Because if we get that right, the visitation, the economic activity, the long-term resilience becomes much more sustainable outcomes. And then there's one piece that is ultimately determines whether any of it lasts, and it's the people. More specifically, whether the next generation sees themselves in these places and sees a future connected to them. Because we can build trails, we can improve access, we can create economic opportunities. But if young people don't feel connected to the place itself, if they don't see pathways into stewardship, leadership, conservation, or meaningful work, then the long-term system eventually weakens. And that's where this conversation has to go next. Not just how do we build outdoor economies, but how do we build the next generation of people who will sustain them? And that's exactly where Evan comes in.
Thank you, Katie. I'm excited. I'm going to start with one of my favorite pastimes, and that is ranting about the kids these days. And I want to do that by sharing a conversation that I recently overheard. I was on a field trip for a local high school. We were driving up to Springfield, and in the back of the vehicle near where I was sitting, I overheard a small group of high school students talking about their recent summer jobs. They had been working at Dixon Springs State Park, and a little backstory. That park has a beloved outdoor pool that families have enjoyed for generations, but the concessionaire had recently stepped aside and there was no one to run it. And so a local community service organization in our region called Arrowleaf stepped in and they took over the concessionaire and then they provided summer jobs for local high school students. And these students, they weren't using community or youth development languages they were talking, they were just describing their summer. They talked about things like getting paid and how much that mattered to them because without a paycheck, they couldn't have afforded to spend a summer doing something in nature. They would have had to go where they could find hours, most likely handing upside down blizzards to people out the Dairy Queen drive-through. That's where a lot of the high school students work in our town. They also talked about the people that they met and they worked with, real people who were their age from their high school that maybe they didn't know well, but also other local schools. And they talked about how excited they were to be making these connections face to face and not simply across a screen. And then they talked about how those relationships changed the way they understood other people. They talked about how the experience made them more patient and more open. It helped them navigate conflict at school differently during the school year. And they talked about feeling better physically and feeling calmer every time they went home after work. Now, the students didn't know they were describing a framework, but they were. And every one of those things they named maps onto bodies of peer research that both Brooke and Katie have been sharing with us. And we all know the economic story of rural Illinois, the agricultural and coal economies that built so many of our communities have changed. And that ripple effect is showing up everywhere. There's economic distress, poor health, and youth struggle. They're all expressions of the same underlying conditions. And nationally, youth mental health has been deteriorating, and significantly so since around 2012. And we've heard the debate about cell phones and social media, and those matter, but here's what we need to hold on to. The evidence for what actually helps young people is clear and it's consistent. And structured outdoor programs that offer tangible, embodied, real experiences, that offer real relationships and real connection to place, produce measurable gains across multiple dimensions of well-being. And one of the things those students said as they were winding up their conversation that really stuck with me, one girl took a deep breath and she said, there needs to be more opportunities like this for us. And I'm excited to share that there are. Brooke, if you don't mind advancing the next slide. We actually have a partnership in southernmost Illinois right now. We're partnering with the Shawnee National Forest and IDNR, a local regional and outdoor and environmental education center, the Friends of the Shawnee National Forest, and local high schools to imagine and begin building the infrastructure around a youth conservation corps for our region. And it's intended to help backfill the capacity gap for our land managers who are overwhelmed with deferred maintenance to help invest in the infrastructure around the outdoor economy, but also as work-based learning for young people so that they can start to develop marketable, tangible skills. And as I think about this, I am picturing a bridge being built across the river towards these young people that provide them with lower barriers. This will be paid conservation work so these young people can choose it rather than feeling pressured to miss out on development opportunities to work at Dairy Queen. But it also is skill development aligned with the land management partners. And it provides multiple off-ramps for these young people throughout this development. They can have entry-level positions right out of high school. They can pursue seasonal, but then permanent positions supporting livable wages right here at home. They can also pursue higher education and advanced degrees to rise within the land management and the outdoor sector, human services sector. And so if you don't mind, let's go to the next slide, please. So here's how I like to think about investing in something like working at the pool at the state park or a youth conservation corps. I like to think about 5 returns. And so remember the students, they were telling us that their experiences actually map on to a lot of things that research is confirming. Those students said that they felt better after a day of work. And Brooke just showed us that's not platitude. It's real, it's measurable. A 2026 meta-analysis of nature-based interventions for young people found a large and a positive effect size on their own well-being and health metrics. The social belonging aspect. Those students talked about meeting real people face to face and how that changed the way they were relating to others. They described being more open and more patient and better at navigating real conflicts at school. And it's not just because they were taught social skills curriculum, but it's because they were working alongside other young people on something that mattered. And that's what research shows, that relational networks, intergenerational mentorship, and shared purpose all have an impact. A 2023 study found that outdoor learning environments also build agency, they build competence and a sense of belonging in ways that classroom settings rarely achieve. And if you think about that for a moment, as young people have shifted more and more into virtual spaces, they have access to ample social connections. But how many of those come through face-to-face embodied experiences? And where does a young person have the opportunity to learn about their own agency, their own ability to affect meaningful change in their environment? And it's that sense of agency that leads to a sense of purpose and meaningful lives that can be really, really impactful and worth every ounce of investment. And so something that keeps me up at night, young people in economically distressed communities are surrounded by narratives that say this place is a dead end. When you or a young person has meaningful work with visible results, not a simulation, but something real like ecological restoration on a landscape, we're offering them evidence that they're capable and that their efforts count towards something. Research on well-being tells us that this kind of engagement, something larger than ourselves, is one of the most powerful pathways to a sense of meaning in life. It's not happiness in the feel-good sense either. It's purpose. And purpose is what's missing from too many young people's lived experiences. And I'll go to my final slide here. So here's why Katie and Brooke and I love putting our minds together and sharing what we're thinking about. Brooke made a case that nature heals, and the evidence is powerful. But healing alone isn't enough for a 17-year-old in southernmost Illinois who's trying to decide whether this place holds a future for them. You can feel healthier and still feel hopeless about prospects. Katie's made the case for our outdoor economy. It's real infrastructure, nearly $700 billion nationally and $26 billion in Illinois alone. Those are real jobs with real tax revenue. And she's right. But that economy needs a trained workforce to grow. And it needs development designed to serve residents first, not just attract visitors. We believe that youth development on the land can be the sinew that connects those two arguments. It can be a mechanism. When you invest in connecting young people to structured and meaningful work in natural landscapes, we're simultaneously delivering those health benefits that Brooke has described, and we're building the skilled workforce that Katie's outdoor economy requires. And we're cultivating the kind of place attachment that makes young people turn around and look at this region as a possibility instead of a potential dead end. Those students who worked at Dixon Springs last summer, and the students who might have opportunities with a youth conservation corps right outside their high school, they didn't need any of us to explain our research framework to them. They felt better, they earned a paycheck, they learned skills. And at the end of it, they said, we want more of this. Thank you. I'm going to hand it back to Brooke.
Brooke, you're muted.
Thank you. I realized I needed to do the slide and unmute. That's two things, and that was too much. Thank you. So in closing, we want to do something a little bit differently to start to bring everybody to the forefront in how their minds are working right now. We hope that having this conversation has generated some thoughts in you, some excitement, some potentially frustrations. And just like when the three of us get together, we're hoping that that excitement kind of has oozed over into you guys and thinking of how does this pertain to me and my silo and where do I connect? So we want to close a little differently, thinking that community resiliency is not built through presentations, through PowerPoints. It's built when people connect with what they already know in ways that maybe they haven't considered before. So that's our activity here. The reality is that many of us in our communities are responding to the same underlying fears that we all have, regardless of what sector we're working in. That's when we feel like young people are leaving our communities. We feel like people may be isolated more so, even though we're more connected now than we ever have been, that mental health is outpacing our support right now, that communities are losing their third spaces and their gathering places for us to connect, or that maybe our communities and people in them stop believing that they can meaningfully shape where they live. And so those are all common threads that we are probably feeling today when we look at this. And a lot of the times, if you're like me, we sit and wait for solutions to come from the top down. So where are the funding opportunities for this? Let's go out and hunt for those. Let's start to look at policies that are being developed that I can chime into, or for just somebody with more authority and more time and resources to take this on. But resiliency rarely starts there. It often starts network out, not top down. And so right now we have a large network here today. So through relationships, through collaborations, and through people seeing their work as connected instead of separate, and usually connected on some of those threads, we want to engage you guys to participate in one of these Slido polls. If you guys are familiar with it, you can scan the QR code there with your phone, or you can join at slido.com and enter in that number there. It's just going to take you to a website. You don't have to download an app or anything like that. And when you get to that page, it's going to ask you, what is one new partnership, connection, or approach that your community could explore to strengthen long-term community resilience? And as you guys type these, they're going to pop up on the screen. And if you are so inclined and have more than one idea, you can do it as a separate entry, I believe. And so it should let you, but these will pop up here where we can see them. I want you guys to think beyond your normal role. So all of us have a professional role, but we also are people in our communities, likely with families and kids that engage with different things. And so think outside of your normal partnerships, traditional funding models, and think through how we could do this. I have to move my things out of the way here. Local government could explore connections with community native plant clubs to build out green spaces and rain gardens. I love that. Yes. Community Foundation Youth Council. Yes, Chicago Park District. Matching private donors to projects, absolutely. Building out our bike path networks throughout the city and neighboring communities, park runs. Excellent. You guys had these in your back pocket. I can see that. They were just coming out. Oh, somebody's already speaking my language here. Therapy prompts on existing trails to encourage mental health. That's beautiful. Yes, and that's where people will have those ideas and then they'll say, but I don't know what the therapy prompt would be, and that ends. And so that's where I get excited to pick up and say, I would love to make therapy prompts, mental health boards, right? And so some of these we see sometimes, right? So I want to think through, what does the mental health board do differently than it does now? Who is sitting on that? Who should be sitting on that isn't on there already, right? Is there somebody in the community serving a role? That where we need to connect to make this a system rather than, oh, the mental health board needs to really think through the mental health issues that are going on in our neighborhood and figure those out. But how do we get economic development connected to? So this is where that connection with, I would love to see like mental health board connected to whom? Who else should be on that mental health board to help them see outside of that silo? Recreational restorative therapy or theory and program design. That's absolutely something. After school programs for the most at risk. Yes. And then who is heading those up? Is there mental health involved? Is there outdoor recreation? There we go. Connect. So here's our two-piece. Connect high school students to local trails that need maintenance. Evan, right? I can see him nodding over there. That is so exciting. And that's where those kiddos, we want to see that. They want to have that purpose, like you were saying. And then we're getting the health benefits from them being outside. And like Katie mentioned, then they can see an opportunity for them in their future at that place, right? When we have a connection to our future self in that moment, and you can imagine being 30 years old with kids working in that area, even as a high school student, when we have that connection through that, it's so important. Land banks can work with local park foundations for vegetable flower gardens and fruit-bearing orchards near existing parks. I love that. Yes. Oh, somebody's already got good work. We have the new Philadelphia Natural Historic Site, the National Park Service, and we could partner with them more like a junior ranger program. Yes. Yep. Strengthen relationships with your regional planning council. I love that. It's anybody. Strengthen relationships with your regional planning council. I I think through so often about when I have reached out to people being hesitant of, oh, I don't want to put anything else on their plate. I had a project not too long ago that I thought for a 4-H team would be great to help me with. And I had resistance in my own mind. I resisted on behalf of them already to say, oh gosh, I don't want to ask them to do that. They probably already got their thing. They were so excited when I reached out. They said, we want to do something different. And some of our kids are interested in mental health work someday. And so it started something. And to think if I would have let my hesitancy stop me because I didn't see my role there. So some of what I encourage you guys to do is think through how you can stop somebody's hesitancy too, in making sure that they know that they have a seat there. If you are part of any of these groups or corporations or planning councils or boards, that you find ways to invite and open that door to people to hear their voice. Incorporate as many plans as possible into a master plan. Yes, to have shovel-ready projects for funding when the funding comes. But we're sitting here waiting, right? And we've got these comprehensive plans. And sometimes just the plan until it has is that good enough plan. We're going to do that this far until more funding comes, right? And so we're going to get it this far until funding comes. I really love that. And so this is that piece of how could health, youth, economy, outdoor recreation, housing, we hadn't talked about that too much, housing, education, local culture, right, work together differently. We, like I said, mentioned those pieces to start with. Most of us are working towards the same goal for our communities. And it feels like we're pulling against each other when we're doing it in silos. Funding has a weird scarcity mentality if you've been in nonprofit and fighting, and it makes us want to fight against each other in those moments. But collaboration is that key. So really thinking through, can we create this program? Who would have to start it, right? Who else needs to be at the table for this? Who needs to be at the table to start making a master plan, a comprehensive plan? Think through systems, relationships, and across sectors, and recognizing that outdoor connection is something that we have readily available, right? It is that funding free aspect. I know that we have to have maintenance and things like that, but when we are talking about things like trails, we always are connecting to an underlying need here. So if we're looking at trails, we're looking at connection. If we're looking at youth programs, we're looking at belonging. If we're looking at outdoor events, we're looking at community identity, tourism, we're looking at economic stability maybe, and parks could be preventative health. Third spaces could be social regulation, making sure that we shift the room from projects and shift our topics at these tables from just, oh, let's do project-based pieces to human needs in our community. And that is what community resiliency is. Sometimes I forget the title of our talk even about what community resiliency is. And that's where it hits home for me so many times, is where we shift from like, these could just be projects of check boxes if we wanted them to be, but these could also be excellent layers of state land managers and local schools sharing curriculum around natural resource skills and pathways, right? Just really great stuff. Um,
I
okay,
I don't want to
go
cut
ahead,
you
Katie.
off, Brooke, but
Yes, please.
we're also giving everybody a little inside view of what our phone calls turn into. We
Really,
go a little bit over because we all can't stop talking about all of this. So
absolutely.
yeah. So I think that's also kind of the main thing too, is that if this does excite you, you could reach out and you want to talk more, even if it's just to bounce ideas to one or all of us, that we are all happy to come and talk and answer any questions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so with that, I think, do we have time to open it up for questions?
Yes, absolutely. If anybody has questions, feel free to put them in. I had a couple. I just went ahead and moved them in so people could see them. Somebody put, seriously, contact your regional planning council. We want to help. Feel like that's important. Yes, everybody, please, you should be building relationships with those people. Um, if you guys want to put your questions in the chat, feel free. I did have a couple of my own, but I just wanted to thank you all for that very expansive presentation on community resilience. I personally connected with all of your stories of being a rural kid who left for college and returned home to make a difference. Your presentations covered so many common experiences and gave our audience some hope, especially the toll at the end. There were so many great projects. I really love that. And hopefully we can build more resilient communities around health, education, and outdoor recreation. Okay, so I haven't seen any new questions come in, so I got a couple of my own I would like. And we'll try to keep this short because we are right past the hour. But for Dr. Brooke, you talked about using trails as health systems. Do you have any resources that would help introduce communities to these types of projects?
Ooh, yes. I can't remember. SAMHSA has some on their website. I can't think of who their resource that they link to is, but that was where I found my latest one that I was connecting to on so samhsa.gov, and look on there for I can't remember the title, but they have nature-based wellness initiatives, and they have a ton of options on there for not reinventing the wheel, basically. And so that is also my go-to. I don't want people to try to reinvent the wheel. Look at like Katie had some great examples of how people had done that in smaller communities. So and then that can give some of that language too, and the statistics. That is where you could go to find some of those as well.
Beautiful. And yeah, I can look that up and I'll share it whenever we share out the
Yes.
follow-up email and resources. We do have a question from Caitlin Fredericks. I might have said that last name wrong. Sorry about that. They said, I work in physical activity promotion with the extension and have a background in behavior change. What have you seen work well for getting the people who would most benefit from these resources to actually taking advantage of them? So that's up for anybody. Anybody
I
who
was
feels
like,
comfortable answering it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
the main thing that I talk to with communities about this, because again, I know that it is a all of this can be just kind of a shift in ways that we think about and that we frame things. And so again, when we're starting to, have these small towns and we say we want to build a trail in your town. We want you to get outside and walk more. We want you to actually use the river recreationally instead of crossing it. Again, you've heard our stories. We live in these towns. We know the feedback that you get from people, and especially kind of the older people, because it's just something that we all didn't kind of grow up thinking of that. And so what I always say, this kind of goes into what Evan talks about, is when you're trying to make a shift. And again, this isn't an amenity shift or a recreation shift. This is a shift in public health when it comes down to it. And anytime we've tried to make big changes and have been successful in public health changes, be it anti-smoking, be it seatbelts, be it anything like that, we start in the schools. And so we kind of have that change from the ground up. because we're a lot more likely to walk on that trail if our grandson helped build it than if somebody got a grant and we brought in people that came in and built that trail, right? Then it just becomes a conversation piece of these people trying to get me to use a goddamn trail. Right. So we've all heard some forms of that. So that's kind of, if you're trying to introduce that stuff to the town, I would say, yeah, the pushback's going to happen from kind of, especially some of the older community. But again, these kids, we've seen it in practice and we've seen it through other different issues too. They're much more open and they can see the value in it.
Absolutely. I'll second that with that. I love that analogy of Evan talking about having the bridge on the other side to meet those kids. So there has to be groups then, once we are investing in the kids, that the groups who have that drive and that initiative, whoever, all of those boards, all of those collaborations, the 4-H groups, the adults on the other side have to be willing to pick up where and go engage with those kids if their parents aren't willing to, and reducing the barrier to access for the kiddos to do that when they're being taught that in the schools. And any way to find, if they're, I think they said their background was in behavior change. So I'm thinking like we always think about consistent use is the key. The actual piece of behavior change is inconsistency. The hardest part of doing something is the first inconsistent behavior. And so if we can find that way to make that first inconsistent behavior to engaging with it, we can get people who are more likely to use it. So that's where that thinking about reducing barriers to that and making it partnering with something that they already do, right? The church they already go to that church function. Well, the church function moves to that outdoor rec piece and connects it and does a warm handoff type of piece. So
I know we're out of time, but I do want to jump in because I love the question. And I'll answer it by saying one thing that gives me a lot of hope is humanity does tend to have helping tendencies. How many times have you driven past someone with their hood up on the side of the road and you think to stop and ask if they need help, or open a door for someone when they have their hands full? And I have found across multiple populations, if I invite someone to help or to serve, it tends to lower barriers. And I've seen that with veteran groups, or I've seen it working in a wilderness therapy setting or with young people. The invitation to say, hey, we would love your help with this thing. And ecological restoration is an area where people tend to be interested in helping. And so I found a lot of success by first approaching, hey, help us build this thing or help us clean that space. And then we get into the minutia of its health benefits or its behavioral change potential. But I love that people are helpers and there's a lot of power in being invited to serve.
That was beautiful. Yes, I love whenever we remember the good of humanity.
yes.
Okay, we are at time, but I do have one last question for Dr. Coulson. How can communities invest in their youth skill development this summer? Are there any examples of local park districts recruiting students for summer land restoration, maintenance positions, or even volunteer opportunities? And how can communities get connected to organizations like the Youth Conservation Corps?
That's a lot of good questions. I would use this moment to elevate our friends and colleagues at Extension. There are so many opportunities for young people to get engaged with 4-H or other extension programs, but also local park districts. Look for your regional day camps or summer camps. Look for after school programs, but people who are in the business of helping grow young people, they're going to have opportunities or they're going to be able to point you to other opportunities. And then lots and lots of conservation associations out there. So I would look at SCA, Student Conservation Association, and keyword search conservation or conservation pathways. And young folks will have a lot of trails to start walking down.
I love that. Well, I just want to wrap up with a big thank you to all of our presenters. This was a phenomenal webinar, and just a call out that we will be back in June. So if you want to keep an eye out on our registration page for our next webinar, we'd love to have you all here again.